words like unify and divide are really very loaded in the English language. Maybe they're loaded in every language. Maybe in some languages they have different connotations. Certainly in Chinese, politically, to talk about factions, factionalism, division, as opposed to unification, as opposed to maintaining a mass line, and that's a unique phrase in Chinese. Very often we don't think rationally about why it is in politics that we might break up into smaller groups, and we don't think rationally or strategically or in a detached way about why it is we might have centralized hierarchical organization, or why we might unify into larger and larger entities, right? Very often these things are pursued as if they're ideals. They're pursued idealistically. And there shouldn't be anything idealistic about it. The answer for why we should operate in a small group as opposed to a large group in politics is fundamentally the same as how we would ask and answer those questions in a workplace setting or in a classroom setting if we're engaged in an educational exercise, right? Paradoxically, we form ourselves into large groups for the same reason why we divide ourselves into small groups, to get more done. I'm currently an educator. I'm currently teaching at university level in China, 20 and 21-year-old students. Why do I divide them into smaller groups, into smaller classes? To get more done. On the other hand, for some activities, why unify into a larger class or even a huge theater of several hundred students at once? To get more done. For some types of tasks, and again, many of you will have experienced this in the workplace, different types of workplaces, different types of tasks. There are some tasks where you want to be in small groups. There are some tasks where maybe you want people to work alone. And there are some tasks where people need to get involved in large, centralized organizations, be they hierarchical or otherwise. Okay? So we have to think about these things. We have to think about these things tactically and strategically with detachment from a pragmatic perspective, and not think that unification is an end in itself. So I say this in preface to a video dealing primarily with the latest progress in the mutiny over at Direct Action Everywhere. Direct Action Everywhere, they abbreviate their own name as DxE. This is the way they choose to abbreviate their name. Fine. Direct Action Everywhere is a medium-sized vegan activist organization with pretensions of being both nationwide in the United States and indeed global, international. And most of their members now are based in Berkeley, California. In the past, they were more based in Chicago, within the United States. One of the really interesting aspects of their current mutiny, of people rising up against the leadership, is that in many ways, it's the idealism of Direct Action Everywhere 1.0 rebelling against Direct Action Everywhere 2.0. What do I mean by this? The original iteration of DxE, of their mode of operation, of what they were trying to do and how they were going to do it, they refused to admit that they had any hierarchy at all in the early days. They said they were a completely horizontal network of activists, and then there were some details about different chapters coordinating with other chapters. And over time, what emerged, and they use the word emerge quite a lot themselves. They talk about an emergent authority structure, was that no, they weren't egalitarian at all. They weren't horizontal at all. They were a strictly vertical, hierarchical organization led by one man and his girlfriend, Wayne Seong and Priya. They were the self-appointed dictators for life, and really all pretense of having elections and caucuses, some kind of transparent democratic process, was revealed to be a joke. Now, one of the ways they did this was that on top of the older structure of authority, they created a new structure of authority, which they referred to as DxE Global. That was their term, rather than DxE top layer of the layer cake. And Priya and Wayne, this couple who basically run and control the organization, then started setting up various pretexts to justify their command and control of the organization and a hierarchy of chapters and their commanders and what have you. Now, some people, especially people in a straight political science background, might just regard this as progress, might just regard this as positive, to say, okay, they had an early idealistic phase in which they were basically in denial about inequality in the organization. Then the organization grew and they got a budget, and somebody had to control that money to decide who does and does not get paid. Because yes, they are paying people. They are putting money in people's pockets to pay for their cost of living. People are getting salaries. People are getting money out of this. Which again, I'm not hating in principle. I'm just pointing out this is one of the reasons why democracy and transparency and how you define the organization, how horizontal is it? Some people are getting paid, some are not. Some people are getting featured on their websites and on their YouTube channel and so on, and some are not. These are the things people within the organization fight about. The people I've talked to within DxE, the issue of just recognition and promotion within the organization. Like somebody works really hard on some particular protest or project, and then they feel they're not being recognized by the leadership, whereas someone else is. There's a lot of tension around that sort of thing. This is a social media era, and they began with DxE 1.0 pretending that DxE was completely open-ended and horizontal. Kind of anyone could define what the organization was, and anyone could just start up their own chapter and start up their own activism. But in reality, in practice, some people are more DxE than others. Some people are making those decisions, even if it's just literally the decision of who gets their link posted on Facebook, who gets their video posted on YouTube, who gets some kind of recognition or adulation from the higher levels of the organization, and who does not. A lot of those struggles are really keenly felt by people. Now, why? I mean, some of you might just be laughing and saying, hey, this is petty. Well, it's a lot less petty when, one, there's time involved, two, there's money involved, and three, there are criminal charges involved. There are legal fees involved. People are getting lawyers. People are getting put in prison, even if just overnight. People are engaging in forms of activism that have these kinds of consequences in their life in terms of time, effort, money. And you're in an organization where some people are getting paid, other people are getting nothing, and those people who are getting nothing may be dealing with lawyers' fees and legal charges as a consequence of the same activism the other people were engaged in. So those inequalities can be very keenly felt beyond this mere social media question of whose video is on the official YouTube channel and whose is not, right? And there have been other problems I'm not really going to get into in this video. There have been problems of misconduct, put it that way. And then how does this hierarchical organization deal with misconduct? Is it really democratic or transparent? Is it really responsible? Is it really able to hold their own people to account? And in the last video I did on Direct Action Everywhere, we talked about the extent to which, reportedly, and ostensibly, and I believe actually, their own process of elections, their own process of selecting leaders has really been co-opted and corrupted and controlled by the two people on top so that they can remain on top forever. So here, what does it all come down to? There was a new video put on Facebook, and on Facebook only, by Wayne and Priya, the self-appointed dictators for life. That video is really very dishonest. It suggests that their problem is just with one person who's in charge of one Facebook group, somehow connected to Direct Action Everywhere. I can give you a link below this video to a web page from liberation.global. And these people, they openly describe themselves as a faction of Direct Action Everywhere. They get an A+ for honesty. Direct Action Everywhere has now split into factions. That's the honest, direct way to say it. And this faction really is representing the ideals of 1.0, of saying, no, they want to go back to the situation. I'm quoting the website directly. They say, quote, a grassroots network doesn't need top-down leadership. It needs collective control over its identity and its means of communication. So they want to go back to a situation where there are no dictators and maybe there are no elections, where this is a horizontal network of aspiring vegan activists and where nobody is the star leader or the dictator or what have you. They want to get rid of the top-down form of leadership that Wayne and Priya have imposed. It says, I can quote this directly, they want a consensus-driven, collectively controlled, basically internet presence that connects these different groups of activists. So that was back in the day, a couple years ago, whenever you asked Direct Action Everywhere about their organization or hierarchy or who is in charge, they used to reply, nobody is in charge. Direct Action Everywhere is just a network uniting groups of activists as equals horizontally. And then more recently, they slipped into the era of DxE 2.0 of so-called emergent leadership, where they were admitting openly and even promoting themselves as led by Wayne Seong and Priya. And indeed, Wayne Seong and Priya controlled the money. Ultimately, there's a bank account, and some people have the legal ability to sign a check drawing in that bank account, and others do not. That's the ultimate inequality, right? So the bullshit about we're all equal, it's all horizontal, we all cooperate, it got to end somewhere, and it ends here. The buck stops here. It ends with fundraising, and ends with money. Now, there's another important corrupting influence of money on this movement, which is that DxE 1.0 was really not about so-called open rescue. It was about disruption. And they had this whole complex philosophy to justify why disruption, which is a form of public protest, barely legal and slightly illegal public protests, disrupting the normal lives of meat eaters, why disruption was their method of activism, and they justified this through a very complex set of allusions to Mahatma Gandhi in India and the civil rights movement in the United States and the abolition of slavery in the U.S. Civil War. I mean, I have videos criticizing that period of their rhetoric. I think it is bullshit, but that was their mantra. That was their modus operandi. They were this horizontal organization that just did disruption, and they had a whole complex philosophical rationale for that. Well, over time, the problem is people don't really want to donate money to you for disruption, right? Where does the donor support come from? I think everybody in the game figured this out pretty quickly. You get a lot of donor support, you get a lot of interest, you get a lot of money from so-called open rescue and videos featuring open rescue, okay? So this means things like them DxE members breaking into a chicken farm and stealing the chickens. At one point it was a turkey farm. It basically includes cattle rustling, if we're being blunt. And yeah, that is criminal. That is considered a crime. You're stealing someone's property because legally all these animals are the property of the farm or what have you. But it's very dramatic. It looks dramatic on video. It's something you can boast to the donors about. A lot of the donors are themselves elderly, soft-hearted people who just love animals. And you can imagine these people, the people who are writing checks, the people who are giving donations, maybe they do not respond positively to Direct Action Everywhere going into a Chipotle fast food restaurant and just screaming at people that meat is murder, which is what they do. They go into restaurants, scream people. That does not sell to the donors. Oh, but if you put together an emotional, tear-jerking video that shows you breaking into this farm at night, you know, and rescuing this chicken and then filming the chicken and how supposedly happy it is now that it's living in someone's backyard in Berkeley, California, this pulls at the heartstrings of donors, including non-vegan donors, including meat eaters who want to just give to the cause because they're animal lovers. This stuff sells. And I notice both the rebel group, the new faction trying to take over the leadership of Direct Action Everywhere, and Wayne and Priya, they've both gone over in a huge way to this mode of activism, so-called open rescue, rescue-based activism, rescue and sanctuary-based activism, which wasn't what their movement was founded on. Their movement was founded on, back at 1.0, the fundamental conviction that social science research would guide us to more and more effective methods of activism, and that those methods of activism could, should, and would resemble the most effective methods from the United States civil rights movement. Now, whether that's intelligent or stupid, stick with it for a minute. Why aren't they putting together folk bands? Why aren't they putting together groups of gospel singers and going from church to church? If you want to talk about effective methods of galvanizing public support in the civil rights movement, anybody who knows anything knows that music was a huge part of it, and specifically gospel singers and folk singers going from church to church, from town to town. Vegans in the United States have never done anything like that. So my point here is there's not some simple leap of inference from saying learn the lessons of history, learn the lessons from the social sciences, learn the lessons from the civil rights movement, jumping from that to disruption, i.e. standing in a restaurant and screaming at people that meat is murder, it's not food, it's violence, these other slogans. There's no simple way to jump from that premise of DxE 1.0 to open rescue, to cattle rustling. Like, okay, so you can rob cattle from a farm and then take them and put them in your backyard. You're now guilty of a crime. Cow's probably worth a lot of money. It's probably a pretty serious level of theft you can go to jail for. But you make this tear-jerking video and then people donate money to you. How is that justified by social science research? How is that justified by the history of the civil rights struggle in the United States? And of course, there are deeper questions here of why would the civil rights struggle, how useful is it compared to any other historical example for being stealing from? There are a lot of questions, and I've had a lot of videos on this channel in the past already discussing those questions. But this new video from Wayne and Priya, it is really being dishonest with us in stating that the problem is just a rebellion from one person controlling one Facebook group. If you click on the link below this video, they have a running list of all the Facebook groups that are now led by the rebel faction. I could call them the egalitarian faction, the faction that doesn't want hierarchy, that doesn't want the dictatorship of Wayne and Priya. And it's a long list of Direct Action Everywhere websites that they've taken over. So sorry, you might as well click on it yourself and see, but it includes their Medium page, their Twitter page, DxE Everywhere, that is the Twitter for Direct Action Everywhere, their Instagram page, a whole bunch of other official Direct Action Everywhere pages, like directactioneverywhere.org, the website. The rebels, the rebel faction wanting equality, they have taken away a large part of Direct Action Everywhere's web presence from Wayne and Priya, from the now resented dictators. And as I said in an earlier video, I've read quite a bit of the details about what happened with the last elections and how they've really shut down and cut off most of the sources of free speech and debate within Direct Action Everywhere, which really mattered to people who were committed to that organization, committed to that cause. However, when I click on the Rebel Medium page, Medium's a website for articles, I notice they're still talking as if they control the bank account that Wayne controls. And I talked to someone inside Direct Action Everywhere, and I said, look, it seems to me like these guys are of two minds, that they're a bit, they haven't admitted to themselves what the situation is. Yeah, you guys have taken over a bunch of websites, but you haven't taken over that bank account. You guys are going to have to start your own bank account. And I got a message back saying, yes, that's true. The reality is that now the egalitarian DxE, they're more and more interested in doing open rescue, cattle rustling, chicken stealing, etc., precisely because they're having to get started with collecting their own donations for their own bank account. So that's what it all comes down to, folks. The idea of a horizontal network open to all doesn't work for a couple of reasons. One is that there's a brand name here that ultimately some people have executive control over. What if a group of right-wingers set up their own chapter within DxE? They don't even have to be neo-Nazis, they don't have to be extremists. Let's just say you have people who are hardline, conservative libertarians, members of the Republican Party, and they also care about ecology and animal rights and veganism. And they set up a chapter. I guarantee you the leadership in Direct Action Everywhere, whether it's 1.0 or 2.0 or 3.0, they're going to find some excuse to close ranks against these people and say, no, 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 you don't get to use our name. You can't call yourself Direct Action Everywhere, because all the members, the founding members of Direct Action Everywhere, they're extremely left-wing, and they're extremely into, intersectional feminism, intersectional anti-racism, race politics, gender politics in general. They'll never cooperate with those guys. What if you get a group of people, and they're a bit conservative, they're the kind of guys who own rifles, and they start getting into veganism and animal rights, and, they used to be involved in duck hunting. They're into conservation and forest habitat. They're the kind of people who own four-wheel off-road vehicles and rifles and go out. Let's just say they're moderately conservative guys like that. And they set up their own chapter. They set up DxE Tennessee from the backwoods of Tennessee. Just the brand identity alone is already exclusive and exclusionary, and there are going to be power struggles, hierarchical or horizontal, for who is in and who is out. And as I've already mentioned, there are power struggles over who gets on the front page of Facebook and who doesn't, who gets on the YouTube page, who doesn't. There are power struggles for recognition of that kind within it. And then beyond that, there are going to be power struggles over money, over prison sentences, over legal consequences and who deals with them. There are going to be power struggles over who gets to make those decisions, so long as you pretend that nobody's in charge. And if you admit that there's a hierarchy, then there are also going to be power struggles over who is in charge. Okay? So to wrap this up, I want to say I got a very intelligent set of messages from a Patreon supporter. If you guys want to talk to me, pay $1 to join Patreon. $1 is nothing compared to the cost of a cup of coffee. On my Patreon, a guy named Richard sent me some messages, and I may make more videos actually responding to this statement from Richard, because it is really interesting to me. I got this statement from Richard saying that at this stage, vegans should not be forming more and more fragmentary and fractious groups. They should not be dividing themselves into factions or into small, unique organizations tackling specific issues, that instead vegans should be uniting with large organizations like PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, that have millions of dollars in infrastructure and centralized organization. Now, and he has his reasons for this, and they're intelligent reasons. They just have to be reasons that I disagree with in practice. So we started this dialogue. But for this video, I may talk about that more. I may make another video within 24 hours about it, because it's a really interesting topic. It's a deep topic. We cannot look at unity as an ideal or as an end in itself. And we cannot look at independence, or factionalization, splitting into small independent groups as an end in itself. These are not ideals. The fundamental reason for working with larger groups is to get things done. And paradoxically, the reason for dividing into smaller groups is exactly the same: to get things done.